Today I am going to tell you about two things which I think are disruptive. One, my own personal experience, my own journey as an analyst to someone who ended up writing a book, which is slightly unusual, especially in this country. And the second one is about changes that I see happening in this society, empowerment, education of women and girls, and the immense implication that it has for this country. In August 2014, I submitted a manuscript to my publisher, and this was 18 months after I first started researching on the subject of education and empowerment of girls and women in India, and what it means for the country. To be honest, I was never sure that the book would ever get written. In fact, when I first started interviewing these girls, and would often be asked, why are you interviewing me? And my standard stock response was, I am doing this as a part of a research work. It may be a research report. I used to work for an investment bank, or it could be a series of articles in anywhere on any web social media, or it could be a book, although I knew in my heart of heart that it's a book that I was trying to write. And even before I started doing this, I was a very, very unlikely author. At the end of the day, the better part of my over 2 decades career has been spent as a financial analyst. And I don't know if anyone in this room, at least some of you I'm sure, have read all these fancy reports that we all put out, but most of it is full of fairly prosaic prose, fairly dull, soporific, and some interesting charts, data, tables, etc. that are put in there. This was certainly not an ideal training ground for someone to start, one, writing a normal book, and two, to also write on women and empowerment, because that's something that I had never really dwelt on it in a way that made me the right person to write such a book. It all started in many ways that these things start accidentally. Any disruption starts. I worked for an investment bank named CLSA, and the founders of CLSA were journalists, as it so happened, and they believed that there are various ways to tell a story. Stock market investing is just not about telling about the stock, the company, some numbers, but also the stories behind it. Like the objects that we heard about, there is something else behind companies, the people, their places, and we could talk about a story. So therefore, when I started writing first person accounts of my traveling to different places within the country, the company encouraged me, which itself was unusual. But more importantly, to my pleasant surprise, the clients loved it, and they started writing back. They wanted to see more of it. And when I look back and think what was it, the stories were very powerful to tell about what was happening in India, what's changing in India, what's good in India, what's bad in India, what are people's lives like, what implication does it have finally for the society, for the companies that we talk about. I'll give you a very small example. It was I think sometime in 2007 or 6, I was traveling between Chandigarh and Delhi, and I stopped at a dhaba for lunch fairly late in the afternoon when it was reasonably empty. I am sure we all have done it at some point of time. Because it was empty, the dhaba owner, in this case a guy in his late 20s, Bhupinder Latha, had time, and we started chatting up. He had inherited that business from his father, who had run it for probably 30 or 40 years. He had just made it into a pakka structure, proper structure. And he said since Prime Minister Vajpayee's National Highway Development Program took off, in 2 years' time, his business had gone up by 30 times. No number in the country captures that, and is not so powerful to convey this information. His business had gone up 30 times. More importantly, what he had done, an extension of that dhaba, he had made it into a small store, a general purpose store, filled with stuffed toys, buses, cars, guns. Every family that came there, it was sure that the children would go there for some time and possibly pick up something, all made in China, of course. When I was there, He was also building an extension to the dhaba behind it to make it into an air conditioned place, partly air conditioned, partly non-AC. I mean, these are all very familiar signs now when we travel around, but this, like 10 years back, it seemed fairly unusual even for that day. This was not all. When I got the bill, imagine my surprise, there was this bill which had VAT, and I was charged a value added tax on what I had consumed. This has never happened to me in a dhaba. So I spoke to Bhupinder and asked him that, look, do you really pay this tax, or this is just for my payment? You're collecting the money from me and nothing will ever get paid. He said, no sir, I pay VAT, and I've taken the service tax registration number because it's much easier. I self-declare my income, the inspector doesn't come and harass me now, and this is fine, it's much simpler. If I want a loan, then I get a loan from a bank and all kind of things. Now this one story encapsulates so much about what was happening in India then. Road development leading to diversification income, increase of income, tax collections going up, technology helping in tax collection, urbanization, what it means. Lot more nuances could have been added to that story. What does Bhupinder do with his savings? Where does he save? Where do his children study? What kind of schools do they go to? Where do they travel to? Where do they take their holidays? Yeah, I could go on and on and on. But the power of the story is that many of you out here in the room, I'll not be surprised if you're thinking, hey, I know some story like this, that's interesting, and it could work. When these stories are married with data, the narrative becomes extremely powerful. I could go on with many of these such other anecdotes, but for me, it all started around the similar time. I was in UP, Uttar Pradesh, and I had gone there to see how organized retailers at that point of time were trying to penetrate small town and rural India. This was the days when organized retail was a big noise in urban towns and metros. We had the shopping malls coming up, new stores were opening up every day, and a few people had started making these inroads into the small towns and cities, even rural India. And I said, let me go and see what's happening out there. How is consumption changing on this, in these small places? As it so happened, when I was traveling, it was also election time. Some 1 or 2 phases were over, another 3 phases were to come. And it was interesting to observe an election in progress. And I was watching an election after a long time in a large state like that. And I was surprised at what some of the changes that had happened since when last I had observed an election. Less number of posters, less noise, more organized, etc., etc. And I came back and wrote about that. That was the first time in CLSA that I wrote about a story like that. And as I said, clients appreciated it, they wanted more, I loved it. So it kind of became a regular habit for me to do that. And through all these travels, the 2 images that were very constant with me, that kind of got embedded in my mind. And one was from late 1980s. It was in Shimla that I tried to take a picture of a woman who was washing utensils behind her house, and she shooed me off. She was upset that I had asked her for permission to take a picture. I respected her decision. Then around in about maybe 7 or 8 years back, I remember, this was in the middle of Madhya Pradesh, a village somewhere, where a group of young girls very happily posed for me and gave me as many pictures as I wanted. And they were just not young as in 12 or 13, they were 20-year-old girls as well. And this kind of told me, this was my eureka moment for the story, that there's something that's changing in this country. And I then knew that I wanted to do some point of time a report which would tell this story to my clients. And then in 2012, out of the blue, a publishing house approached me and said, if I wanted to write a book, subject line was open, they would be happy to publish it. So clearly my imagination got tickled, and what was till then a report started morphing into the idea of a book. I also knew that this story is very important to talk about because 47% of the youth of India are women, girls. And if they don't participate in our economy, in our society, its growth, development with all its meanings, and just not an economic growth, then there's no demographic dividend in this country. My objective was that through this book, I could maybe start a larger discourse in our society, bring forth the issues that we need to talk about. All of us need to talk about in our dining table, with our driver, with our maid, with our sons and daughters, with our husbands, wives, everyone. And there's a lot of luck involved in this journey, of course. A lot of people, circumstances conspired to make sure that it happened. I also learned a lot during this travel. I thought I knew a fair bit about this country. I've lived only in this country. I've worked in this country. I've observed my sisters, my mother, everything that through friends, wives, etc. I still learned a lot. For example, I learned that the scourge of female feticide. It's so easy for us to talk about. You see someone cutting a potato and we talked about female feticide, right? It's there. We all know it. It was. I learned that female feticide is not all about dowry, and I thought it was mostly about dowry. To my dismay, I also learned, we know this gender ratio very well. To my dismay, I also learned that I had thought education and prosperity are the passport to change the social attitudes, and I learned it's not so. Actually, the stunning data is better education correlates with a worse gender ratio in this country, and there are reasons. I don't want to go into it given the time limitations, but it was an eye-opener for me to do this book, to write about it, to do the research for this. I also learned, by the way, about how the positive roles that mothers are playing in every household, the positive role of grassroots NGOs that are there, the social entrepreneurs who are there, etc., etc. In April 2015, just over 2 years after I started doing the research, my book was born. This was my personal journey of creative disruption, really. When it translated from being an analyst who wrote stock reports to someone who actually ended up writing a book on a very, very different subject. But I said I wanted to talk about a different subject as well, which was about what I had covered in the book. This is Tehzeem. When I met her, she was probably 10 or 11 years old. She and her sister, who you can see on the foreground, along with their brother and mother, were thrown out by their father from the house. And they were then living alone. Mother had started working somewhere, part of a housekeeping department in a mall. She was lucky to get that job thanks to an intervention of an NGO. And Tehzeem told me, an 11-year-old girl tells me, that a father threw them out of the house because unhe bachchiyan pasand nahi thi. He didn't like the girl child. Not surprising actually, because if you look at some of the numbers, it's appalling. We have seen the global, the gender numbers, but India is really no country for girls and women. 2.85 rapes every hour. 97% of the rapists are known very closely to the victim. The labor force participation is 29%, as against 81% for men, and even global average being over 50% for women. 47% of girls get married before they turn 18. With you can imagine what harmful effect it has not only on their health, but the health of their child, the health of the society, and the cost that the society has to bear up for that. And I could go on and on all about the negative statistics that is there. But then, what makes me positive? Did my research show everything was negative, or did I come out positive and there was my original premise of what I was writing was correct? So this is the picture of a girl called Salwa. Salwa is the first Muslim girl to get a commercial pilot's license in the state of Andhra Pradesh. When I met her, she had just got a license. Coming from an extremely poor background, she struggled. She was interested in doing an engineering. While doing her engineering course, she got interested in a pilot course, which was very expensive. But someone supported her, and here she was when I met her, a trained pilot. It's stories like that that give me a lot of hope. She never flew an aircraft later on. She got married, but the good part is that she is into aircraft maintenance now. So she is working. The one number and data which makes me very positive is in census 2011, for the first time in India's history, the number of addition to literate women was more than the addition to the number of literate men. The numbers were something like 105 million versus 98 million. The wide jaw that was there opening up decade after decade, year after year, the disparity between men and women has started closing in this country. And that's very, very important. That's hugely empowering. And that gives hope that someday will come when we will not be killing 500,000 girl child every year before they are born. Of course, my view is a tad optimistic, because this is a society in churn, there is change happening, and the change will not happen automatically. It is not a God-given right that our socio-attitudinal attitudes will change, our behavior towards the girl child will change. And but if we don't discuss, that change will never happen. Look at what the changes around us, what we are witnessing. A third of the employees in the major IT organizations, TCS, Wipro or Infosys, are women today. That's a third, that's a big number. You look at in this city, almost every other major bank and financial institution is today being led by a woman. Now this is something which is actually unparalleled in the world of finance globally. We have actually achieved something very unique, and which should make us very positive. Bank after bank, financial institution after financial institution is being led by a woman in this country. Something has happened really. It's happened from a small microcosm of women probably, but it's changing. And remember, none of these women are inherited business leaders. They didn't inherit a business from their father, grandfather or husband. They have actually been professional men and women who have studied in institutes like this to rise to where they have risen. When I started researching this book, it was in the immediate aftermath of the brutal rape and then the killing of that girl in Delhi, Nirbhaya, which I'm sure everyone out here remembers. And it made me doubt about the premise on which I was working. But 3 years after her death, Nirbhaya's mother spoke to the media. She is an illiterate, uneducated woman. Nirbhaya came from a fairly challenged background to reach where she was. It was unfortunate that fame came to her with death. And Asha Devi, Nirbhaya's mother, says, and I quote from the media report, "I am not ashamed of taking my daughter's name. Whoever has suffered should not hide their name. It is the offenders who should be ashamed and hide their name. I want to tell everybody today that my daughter's name was Jyoti Singh. From today, everyone should know her as Jyoti Singh." Now this is a big distance that we have traversed in this country to come to a stage where this woman can go on TV and actually say that yes, my daughter was raped, her name is Jyoti Singh, and the world should know her as Jyoti Singh and not as Nirbhaya. There are millions of Asha Devis in this country today who are urging their daughters to get ahead. Get ahead in life, get educated, achieve their dreams, become strong and independent. And probably you can't see it very clearly. I walked into a coaching center out there. There's some IT course going on out there. The surprising part was to me, and showing all my biases, the instructor was a lady, a young girl. She's fully clad in burqa, right at the middle. You can't even make out properly. She had a mobile phone next to her. She was lecturing them. Almost all the students out there were boys. This is in the old city of Hyderabad. And if this is not change, I don't know what is change really. Who could have imagined that this would be happening in a city which was only known for selling child brides to wealthy Arabs, even 15, 20 years back when Bollywood films were being made on the subject. Girls all around us are challenging the patriarchal norms of the society, standing up for their rights, fighting for their rights, and outperforming boys in almost every exam, competitive exams, etc., etc. We saw who was the IAS topper this year, and it's happening all around us. Even as they're fighting, what was touching for me in many ways, surprising, was the battles that they're choosing to fight. They're fighting for the education, they're fighting for the right to work. There's a girl I met in Munger, from Munger, Priyanka, and she was completing her MBA in Patna when I met her, who had fought all her life from almost class 9th or 10th to study. That she was not married off is a miracle by itself. She financed her own education since her class 12 by taking tuitions, etc., etc. And among the various questions that I asked her, would you have an intercaste marriage if you fall in love with a boy in your class? And she said, sir, no. I won't have any objection to my children when I have them to have an intercaste marriage, but I will not do an intercaste marriage. So I said, why? And initially she said, it will hurt my parents. I said, how does it matter? You know, you have hurt your parents, extended family, your uncle, X, Y, Z, for the last 10 years as you got educated. You worked for some time and then have come back to do your MBA. How does it matter today if you hurt your parents one more time for someone if you fall in love with someone? And then she said, sir, that's not the point. The point is, if I do that, then all the reasons that were given to my parents for not letting me study would be proven true. And there are a lot of young girls in my village who will never get educated again. For a 20 or 21-year-old to say that, I frankly was floored, and I became very, very positive. As I said, I came back very encouraged after all this. And I truly believe that we are at the threshold of a multi-decadal change which is very positive out here. It's a struggle, but the change is for the positive, and it's happening around us. The disruption is really at our doorstep. It's up to all of us to embrace it and celebrate that change. Thank you.